Traffic delivery. Traffic facility. Channel development. Inserts. Adverts. Corporate videos. Training videos. Live OB events. Live studio.
1, 1. And Kaveshan and Simon, are you hearing me? Please answer. Can you hear me, Simon? Kaveshan? Come on, guys, talk to me. Please, tell me you're hearing me. Oh, that is wonderful news. And I'll sort out levels when we start the presentations. Thank you. Some more because we'll have to push this a little bit more. And then we're going to start blowing. Because they're not going to talk like this. They're going to talk over there, which is going to be a challenge to try and mix this incorrectly and get perfect levels. So I'm going to drop that audio. I've got an amplifier on that side. That's what I'm saying. For the beginning of this, I'm going to have to run around between. I can't manage it. I have to figure all of this out. 1, 2. There's already a nice feedback. Let's go back some more. 1, 1, 1. How's that? One, two, 1. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. What's the level like there? Oh, that could work. Belinda, how's that level? That could work. It looks like it could work actually. All right. Thank you.
Traffic delivery. Traffic facility. Channel development. Inserts, adverts, corporate videos, training videos, live OB events, live studio, Traffic delivery. Traffic facility. Traffic facility. Traffic delivery. Traffic facility. Channel development. Inserts. Adverts. Corporate videos. Training videos. Live OB events. Live studio.
Just some housekeeping. You know, you can see where the nearest escape route is, but there are also some that way. The conveniences are out of your door and to the right. And just for your information, we don't allow eating and drinking in the auditorium, even if you are a donor of ours. Okay, the Teachers Upfront series is a partnership, as you'll see from the banners, between Wits University, UJ, Bridge, Saibono, and the Mail and Guardian. It's a series of conversations that will happen approximately 6 times a year. This is the first of the events for 2015. It's also the first of the events which is being live streamed out via digital media to, I'm not sure to where, but to many other places. Am I right? Okay. Okay. We've chosen the topic of diversity, I suppose, for obvious reasons. There's no one here from Currow, is there? No. Okay. Clearly, it's becoming an issue that is not just much more in the media, but is one of the issues in education that we've not yet been able to address successfully, and will pose challenges as we go forward. And that's one of the reasons that we think it's useful to have a conversation about the topic with teachers. So we've invited our 3 guests, and I'm not going to give you their full biographies. Just take it from me, and they know what they're talking about. And in those people who haven't seen their biographies, it is available online, and we can give it to you this afternoon if you really want it. The other thing is that there are also forms outside. So if there are questions that you would like to have answered that are not addressed during the course of this afternoon, please feel free to use those forms. Either grab the speakers before they leave and have a conversation with them, or fill in the forms and get it back to us, and we will ensure that the conversation continues between you and them after the session. Okay. So the format, just to make sure everyone's on board with us, the format is that each speaker will have 20 minutes to make their presentations. We'll take a few questions of clarity, but after the end of the 3rd presentation, we'll then open the floor for a conversation between the people on the podium and the people in the audience and the people out there on Barbara's computer screen. Okay. So usually these are very lively debates. This is not meant to be a lecture series. It's meant to be a conversation. So I'd encourage you to listen, think, get your questions, argue your point as far as you can and as much as you'd like. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to call on Professor Nazir Karim from Wits University to kick us off. Nazir?
Good afternoon, everybody. It really is a pleasure and a privilege to be here, largely because I think that the issue that we're trying to address today is clearly one that is not only of local but of international importance. And the one thing that I really want to start off doing is to indicate to you that what we are talking about in terms of diversity has got a particular understanding that is developed historically, and whether we like it or not, we seem to have fallen prey to the way in which this discussion and the way in which these debates get to be framed. And as I continue, I hope I'm going to indicate to you why it is unhelpful. So we've billed this conversation as diversity in classrooms. And what I'm going to start off arguing is that it is much more useful to be talking about difference in cultural relations. So when we talk diversity, we immediately think in terms of different racial groups, we think in terms of different ethnic groups, we think in terms of different cultural groups. And that seemed to have been the historical and international meaning that has come to be given to the word diversity. As much as we tried to expand that notion through other types of things like inclusivity and so on, we actually land up being trapped in the framing of the word itself, because diversity takes on those kinds of meanings. Within South Africa, it speaks directly to our apartheid past and the reason for us to overcome the kind of inequalities and racial segregation that was put into place under apartheid. So diversity then speaks to us in that kind of way. However, today we are at least 20 years in a post-apartheid society. We are now a democratic society, and diversity clearly means going beyond just talking about race, and it clearly means going beyond talking about culture and ethnicity. So when we look at people, the question that you ought to be asking yourself is, what are you seeing? Are you only seeing a Muslim? Are you only seeing a Christian? Are you only seeing a white person? Or are you only seeing a black person? What are you actually seeing? Are you only seeing a Zulu? Are you only seeing a Xhosa? What are you actually seeing when you see people? Now, what's also important about that, and we need to be careful about this, is that the minute you start labeling people in that way, you reduce their entire beings to that label. So if she is blonde, blue-eyed, and white in front of me, that is all that she is, and I reduce her entire being to being blonde, blue-eyed, and white. The fact that she may be a lesbian, the fact that she may be a single mother, the fact that she may be disabled, the fact that she may be coming from an abused household, are things that are of little importance. And therein is the problem with sticking to a very now old-fashioned notion of diversity. As a result of which, I think it is far more useful for us to be talking about, difference in a much more wider way, and which also speaks to a postmodern condition which is influenced significantly by a network society. What do we mean by that? And I think we need to have a bit of clarity on this. You need to bear with me, because I do think that although this sounds very theoretical, they have got very, very direct implications for pedagogical practices in the classroom. But we need to be clear about what we're talking about, and therefore, bear with me, I would need to take you through these initial steps so that we clear these things conceptually. When we're talking about a postmodern condition today, as is demonstrated by this presentation itself, which has been broadcast, using all kinds of multimedia in order to do so, speaks to that postmodern condition. When in your entire existence did you go to a presentation where people were tweeting each other and sending messages through Facebook? When did you go through presentations where presentations were actually being broadcast, video recorded and broadcast at the same time? All of this is being made possible by the kind of information communications technologies that we have. And that is one of the most important characteristics of this current condition. Economically, we see it in terms of a global economy. Politically, what we see are differences that are beginning to increase across the board. Look at every single social movement, and you'll see the ways in which they're fracturing. And I'll talk about two, just for example's sake. If you look at an anti-racist movement globally, gone are the days when you can homogenize and talk about all black people as if they're the same. Trust me, Zuma is not the same as Malema. And neither are the two of them the same as the rest of us in the country. So homogenizing all people as if all black people are the same, frankly, and to put it crudely, is counterfactual. It doesn't speak to the truth. Gone are the days when you can easily claim a sisterhood amongst all women in the world. Okay? There are women that would want to walk around in their hijabs, and there are others who would rather die than to be seen under veils. So whether you're looking at any social movement, you can take your pick, from gay and lesbian movements to disability movements to anti-racist movements to feminist movements, you can take your pick. Differences have impacted on them and have fragmented, the kind of solidarities that we saw characterizing them in the past. Which means what? That today we are dealing with difference on almost every front. Defining yourself today is by no means an easy thing to be doing, because you need to work with the multiplicities of things that are within yourself. And that comes to the next point. What we're seeing then is not just differences that are now that is the point that I think you need to hold on to. Look at yourself and ask yourself the question, who am I? And if you come up with a singular answer, trust me, you're living in some cuckoo land, because you will not be able to define yourself as only one thing. You'll be a male, you'll be a black male, you'll be a father, you'll be a brother, you'll be a husband, you'll be a working class man, you'll be a heterosexual man, you'll be an able-bodied man. All of those identities are within yourself. Difference, therefore, is not only within groups, but indeed within the individual itself. So when we talk about difference then, and you can see why it's far more valuable, it takes us beyond the bipolarizations that we set up with diversity speak. It's black versus white, or it is multicultural, and we all get into this melting pot trying to make things look also hunky-dory and nice, which they're not. What we're seeing then is the rise of what is now becoming to be known as the politics of identities, or the politics of difference. So we then say that on the basis of this, it seems to be making more sense in the 21st century and under postmodern and post-apartheid conditions to be talking about difference more than diversity, so that we can capture the plurality and multiplicity of the various identities that are at work here. So what you do need to hold on to then is that we all have these multiple identities within ourselves. But here comes an important thing that we need to understand, and the issue is, how do these identities get to be constructed and the ways in which they get to be formed. It's not rocket science, people. For anything to be seen as something in itself, for anything to take on its own identity, it needs to separate itself from all things around it. That's the only way in which you can take on your own identity. So a mic is a mic because it's not a podium. A podium is a podium because it's not a laptop. All things. Light is light because it's not day. Winter is winter because it's not summer. So all identities can take on a sense of identity if they distinguish themselves from things around them. How does this play itself out in relation to human beings? We see ourselves in relation to others, and they are define your identity in relation to those others. So you are a daughter in relation to your father. You are a wife in relation to your husband. You are a student in relation to your teacher, and the list can go on. And note again, all of those identities are within you. So I think gone are the days when you need to get, one so-called Indian person, one so-called colored person, one so-called black person, and one so-called white person to have diversity in the room. Frankly, look at yourself, talk to yourself in the mirror, and you'll see multiplicity in your face. And that is something that is of critical importance for teachers to understand, is that we are all carrying these multiplicities in ourselves. And when you look at your students in your classroom, you need to ask yourself the way in which you're fixing those people's identities in ways that are supposed to suit you. So it's easy in our South African schools, for white teachers to look at these poor black people and only see black faces. They don't see gender. They don't see religion. They don't see sexuality. They don't see the language. They don't see cultural systems. They don't see religious beliefs. And when you start unpacking it, suddenly, lo and behold, the blackness evaporates. Because you are more like me than I actually thought you were. Okay? And therein comes the critical lesson. Therein comes the critical lesson that we have, okay, from understanding why difference is so important pedagogically, because it gives teachers a way of seeing the complexity of the humanity that is within each of our learners in our classrooms. Whether we're talking of a grade 3 child, whether you're talking of a grade 6 child, a grade 12 child, or a student at university, all of them are human beings, and all of them carry the complexity of their humanities with them. And as teachers, we need to understand them in the fullness of their humanity, because after all, the purpose of education is to release the potential of all of us that we have as human beings. It's not just releasing the potential of black disadvantaged historical people, it's releasing the potential of all human beings in the complexity and in the multiple ways in which they exist. But this leads to a serious wake-up call for teachers. And I like the way in which these conversation series are billed as teachers up front. Because what happens when we deal with the politics of identities and politics of difference in classrooms is that it becomes not just teachers up front, it becomes very upfront, close and personal. Suddenly, the identity of the teachers are now also at stake. You can't just position yourself in relation to your learners anymore as this completely detached and only a teacher in front of your class. They want to know, where do you stand in relation to what happened in Parliament? They want to know, where do you stand in relation to the New South Africa? They want to know whether you would support them when when two boys want to go with each other to a matric dance. They want you to take a stand. And in other words, it calls on your own identity. So teachers, and this is where teachers would need to do the very important navel-gazing, soul-searching exercises where they need to confront who they are. Now, there's nothing wrong, and you need to understand that, for you to say, listen, I can accept this and I don't accept that. This is where I stand and this is where I stop. This is as far as I can go, and this is what I will. But you need to be clear and honest about where you stand in relation to all of that. The point are being called to the front. We want to know who the teachers are and how they see themselves, because we want to know whether we can depend on them and we can trust them. Interestingly, what schooling does is, and it is internationally consistent and has been historically the case. And frankly, I don't believe it's something that we can skirt around. It is one of the purposes of education, so it's a difficult nut to crack. One of the things that happens in education in all classrooms is a flattening process. We try to, and when we do something like that, which is fine in terms of schooling processes, because that's what we do, we discipline people into becoming students. We equip them with ways to learn, okay? And as students, we treat them equally and give them equal opportunities. What that does, however, this flattening process of treating all learners as if they are the same, is that it ignores the differences that they have within them. And talk to any teacher, they will tell you that my major struggle is to get all learners to see themselves as learners, okay, and to go beyond their own kind of context, background, and identities. Okay? It's not a given, it's a struggle. It's something that teachers work on constantly in their interaction with learners to make them into students. Students are not born people, they are made. Okay? And that construction of that identity of the student is what processes of schooling does. But what we are seeing today, the student in the postmodern 21st century is a student that is interacting with the world in various ways, within cyberspace, in virtual space, and so on, and they therefore, contain within them a whole range of identities that would shock us in some instances because we actually didn't know it was there, but they are living lives that are very, very complex. To really be learner-centered, it would require teachers to come to terms with the identities that are lying beneath, the label of student that students sit with directly under your nose. Which leaves me then with suggesting to you two things. One is that teachers need to confront their own identities. You would need to work through where you stand on various issues, what your prejudices are, what your phobias are, where you stop, where you start on various things. Second is that whilst we are as educators always, principally concerned about constructing the identity of students and to release their potentials as learners, we have to, in current times, work with the multiple identities they contain within themselves. We can't the differences amongst themselves. To understand that not all males are the same. There are going to be boys in your class that are going to do things very differently. And we need to find ways to be able to accept those differences, That leads me then to the last 2 points, which is that we need to place emphasis on tolerance and anti-discriminatory, and you can use any adjective you want, anti-discriminatory, anti-abusive, and anti-violent behavior. And the tolerance that we're asking for is simply this: the world to be like me, but I must be able to accept that there will be various ways in which people can live and be. And that's a very simple thing to be asking, but not an easy thing to be achieving. And one of the ways in which we can arrive at this tolerance is to create spaces, as we are doing now, with a much more deeper understanding of the differences that we're dealing with the ways in which this is playing themselves out in our lives, and to engage in dialogue. You need to understand something here as well. These are not easy issues. They are emotionally volatile, and people are personally invested in it. So it's not an easy path to navigate through, but it is a critically important path to travel on nonetheless. And this means that we need to equip our learners with the skills to be able to tolerate differences, to be able to agree to disagree, for people to be given the space to be who they are, and to be able to celebrate their differences, themselves, and if you wish, their diversity in our classrooms. We are in a world today, people, and that's the point at which I would stop, where it is okay for people to be killed because they are drawing cartoons, for people to be killed because they're walking around in hijabs, for people to be killed because they are of this type of religion instead of that. It's okay for people today to strap bombs around 10-year-old girls and to detonate them remotely. It's okay for security forces to come into our parliament. It's okay to stifle dissent and difference. The time for tolerance and the time for opening up dialogue in order to ensure the democratic practices, and the values of democracy are sustained in ways that respect people's dignity and people's human rights. And I hope that teachers are going to be up for the challenge that's facing us not only locally, but internationally as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nazir. It's a very, very thought-provoking presentation. And I think it creates a really nice context for the conversation to continue from here. Next up, we have Carmen Adams-Hoffman, a colleague of mine at Saibono, who's going to talk about diversity in the classroom, or difference in the classroom, I suppose we should say, Nazir.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad Nazir went first, and it is just so good that that's our starting point. I'm going to continue the conversation now, and I want to start just by sharing this personal view with you, and I hope it's going to sit well with you. My take on this is, And the reason why I agreed to do this is because I believe that the school is a model community. And if we model communities around what the schools look like, then of course it is necessary for us to have this conversation. The reason I'm saying that is because, I don't know, I'm not even moving the mouse and there's this terrible noise. Thank you, David. So I was saying the school is a model community, and if it is, it's supposed to nurture self-esteem, acknowledge and build on life experience, and that would, of course, mean that there would have to be mutual respect, harmony, and tolerance in that system. So how are we going to get this? Then Nazir also touched on something that I want to continue, and this is the fact that this century, and nobody can argue, demands culturally sensitive, futuristic, and internationally focused citizenry. Because people are no longer just sitting in one place. They are talking to people all over the world. And they can do so on various platforms using technology that their parents and their teachers are not even familiar with. They can do so by not even disclosing their identity to anyone. And that's what makes this conversation so necessary. Legally framing all of this conversation today, I'd like to start by just reminding you of the Constitution of South Africa. So even though we might come from different religious points of view, this is saying that we all believe the same thing, therefore making this conversation all the more necessary and all the more complex. This, of course, starting with the Constitution of South Africa, we know that this will now filter down into lots of other policy documents. And I want to get into that because this is obviously the context that we are involved in today and where this conversation takes its place. Our general aims in the South African curriculum echo what is contained in the Constitution, right? The national curriculum statements from grade R right up to grade 12 echoes what is said in the Constitution. So from the foundation phase up to grade 12, we cannot argue that we are in the classrooms of our country supposed to work around this issue, whether we call it diversity, whether we call it difference, but we are supposed to address the issue. And are our teachers able to do that? And if the teachers do that, what are our communities containing parents in it who have different points of view? And how does the school then work with that? Yes, I agree with Nazir. Diversity means difference. It surely does. Any significant difference that distinguishes one individual from another, overt or hidden, yes, we've already had that entry into our discussion, and everything that makes the individual singular and unique within your society. Then it also means, then, if we say that that is what we are talking about, then all this difference that people bring to an organization or a group is there. People bring. So I want to try and set your mind so that you see this as something that someone is offering. It is a gift that they are bringing, and it's not the other way around, a problem for us to deal with. It is a generator of new and a wider range of ideas, ways of doing things to improve quality. And if you look at it like this, if you see it as an offering, then perhaps we can start our conversation and go further. I'd like to define today also what diversity management means. So if diversity means difference, then what is diversity management and what are we supposed to do with it? I'm sure you would agree that it's a process of bringing people on board. Yes, and there are elements of inclusion which we will discuss, and our conversation will take us further into that at a later stage. We need to decide up front, though, are we doing this diversity management for mere coexistence? Are we doing it only for tolerance? Right? Do we just want to coexist in the same space? Or are we managing actual interaction that different people have with each other? And that means we have to take this very seriously. So one has to distinguish that up front. Right? Also, we can say that diversity management is vital. It's a comprehensive managerial process. Right? It's developing an environment that encompasses various systems, policies and practices, and we will go deeper into that as we converse today. But these things need to work for everyone. They need to work for all of the people that are there and even the people that are engaging with that. It is also, diversity management is also administration. There has to be administration if there is management, isn't it so? So what are we administrating? And in all the research I've done, I've picked up that it is this environment that permits people to connect with each other. So that's actually what you're saying you are going to administrate and try to manage. An environment that permits people to connect and to fortify relationships that enable employees to deal with more potentially volatile issues that may later arise. So before the problems that Nazir has highlighted to us, and we know that they are all over the globe, not only in our country, we need to be able to manage these systems, the needs of others, and being open to and utilizing human difference. So we must be able to use it. Yes, we can recognize that that's easy. We can all see when someone is different or when they're behaving differently. But can we use it? Do we have the skill to actually use it? And so this conversation is about that. We also want to see this as an energy field. So we pick up, yes, there's this difference, and this difference creates an energy field. It makes people move and it makes them act. And we want to harness and steer that energy. We also want to explore differences in safe and a nurturing environment. We want people to be able to go further with it and talk about it and discuss it and disagree on certain issues. Right? So we see that diversity management as a vehicle towards this fair treatment and equality that people speak about. It is a tool that we can use, and are we able to manage diversity yet? Are you able to manage diversity? We don't have any experts on this topic. If we did, we'd be in a better place. But right now, I think we're all in the development phase. I want you to ask again, what is your motive for trying to manage diversity? Are we managing diversity for exclusion? Because people do that by designing rules. Sometimes the rules are supposed to lock people out, or they're supposed to enforce some kind of behavior pattern because it makes it easy for us to manage that. So if we're doing that, that's not diversity management. So we need to ask ourselves, are we managing diversity for exclusion or for control? Or is it for inclusion? Right? Are we going to do it on an ongoing basis so that it is a constructive process that continues? Because as we grow with it, it's going to evolve and more issues will come up. And how will we deal with that? Knowing that diversity management is supposed to unleash talent and capabilities which diverse populations bring to the table. We see they're coming with this offering of difference. How will we handle it when all those talents emerge? Are you ready as an educator or teacher in that space? When people start bringing up those talents and gifts, and it's now there on the table, are you able to handle all of that? Because we all know that it's easier when you can put people in the same box. It's more manageable. It's easier. It's simple. If diversity management is the art of multiculturalism and inclusive processes, how is it actually going to be for us when no one is left out and everyone is in the game? It's no longer simple. Teaching is going to take on a whole new meaning. Nazir spoke to us about ourselves. And it's good that the teacher starts with me. Where do I stand on this? What are my personal issues? What are the stereotypes that I struggle with? What are my battles in this regard? And I want you to start with that journey. You can obviously, once you've described yourself in terms of where you stand, which we've agreed is necessary, you will then be able to find out where do you grow from there. Because that's the question only you can answer. And possibly maybe someone who's mentoring you in this regard. So I wanted to start just by saying to you that this is an opportunity, yes. But the opportunity, the first one that arises is the one for you want to develop leadership attributes, especially in the field of education. Also, there is a large opportunity for teachers to help to extend networks in this regard. Networks that stretch out where partnerships and collaborations can be formed, but on a community level, of course, and then growing it up from there. Further opportunities exist for teachers to gain new language. So language acquisition is key. You will have to learn also, of course, how to use this new language and find new ways of communicating, because you're going to be working in this space with all these different people. This also gives you the chance to create ideal learning spaces. And who wouldn't like to be an innovator in that regard? Of course, teachers are right there, up front in that space. And wouldn't you like to be the teacher able to design spaces that have got peers developing values together, accepting and managing their own spaces of learning together? I'd like to read something for you. This comes from the benefits of diversity in education for democratic citizenship. Sociologist Koser, 1975, emphasizes that complex social structures are social situations that are not familiar to us and often quite discrepant with our past lives. Complex social structures are composed of many rather than a few people who have different, often and even contradictory expectations of us. She argues that unfamiliarity, discrepancy, multiplicity, and potential conflict in the complex social structure require people to pay attention to the social situation and challenge them to think or act in new ways. People develop what Koser calls an outward orientation. She showed that people who function in complex social structures develop a deeper understanding of the social world and are better able to function as effective citizens. And we spoke about that. We are developing citizens, right? So there we have got some theoretic underpinning for what we are talking about. Once we get to the bottom of that and we understand why it is necessary to manage diversity in the classroom, that needs to form the core of where we are at, the start. If you only get your learners to the point where you are able to be tolerant and they are tolerant, you have only started the journey. It is not enough to take them further. You need to focus on potential, and you need to be able to unlock that potential. And the secret of working in a diverse group of people is the fact that they will develop each other and unlock each other's potential if you create the space for that to happen. It is a central factor in enormous technological, social, and economic changes, and intercultural contact is increasing. We've already established that with our social media. There is a big risk, and this is one of the main reasons why we also have to manage diversity in the classroom. Because there is a risk for the school and the government department. You could be vicariously liable for acts of your employees or of your learners. Right? Because what happens is now everybody knows the name of the school or the university or the place where these things happen. And that stigma is going to be carried with that institution as a place that has got this problem. And it lasts, eh? It also costs lots of resources to try and turn that around. So, what we are saying is, for the sake of preventing the problems, be proactive. Be proactive, and I know that's why we are happy to have the teachers here that are here. We are now looking at some of the key principles. These are obviously picked up over a wide range of reading material, which we will share with you afterwards. We cannot include all of it in the slides here. I picked up some work from Dr. She speaks about treating people fairly, and this may mean that when you treat people fairly, you actually get to treat them differently, and that's okay. And then she speaks about practicing inclusion and not exclusion in all forms of communication. And that's something I thought all three of those were doable and very interesting. Then, of course, we have the usual principles, things that we know. We know that we need to be accountable and that we need leadership that's committed. And they need, obviously, to develop strategic plans for this. So if you're here, you're a teacher just in isolation, well, I have news for you. You're going to have to bring leadership on board. Because it's going to be fine if you can do this in one classroom. But you know, it's not going to be enough, and the learners have to spill out and also have to engage with others around them. So one classroom on its own is simply not going to work. You also have to link this to performance, and this is a difficult issue for teachers and teacher unions and also for management to deal with. But diversity management has got to be performance managed if you're going to get any results from it. And, of course, you want to be able to measure this. You want to measure the improvement or measure if things are going in the wrong direction so that you can pick up why. So monitoring is key. And then, of course, we have to understand the legal consequences of discrimination. We have to educate and advocate. And we have to make sure that we have committed human resources. So we have to apply resources to the development of the people involved with this. There are various values involved. I'm sure I don't have to mention those. We all have got a notion of what values means and what our personal values are, and perhaps even of our institutions and the organizations we come from. But I wanted to touch on the issue of what drives you. And that also makes you different. And nobody will know what drives you until you share it. Sometimes you're not even aware of it. I want you for this purpose to do some research on yourself. There is a website, www.scarfsolutions.com, where you can do a little assessment and find out what drives you. Is it status, relatedness, certainty, fairness, or autonomy? That's all. You pick one from there. The assessment will definitely show you some results. And you know, it doesn't mean because I know what I'm passionate about and what drives me that I must end up getting my way. Because that's the other thing, is about teaching people, yes, this drives you, but that drives somebody else. And how do you get everybody to get what they're looking for from a situation? Teachers also need to learn, if they figure out what drives them and what drives their learners in their class, that there will never be two people, you know, that will be identical in any regard. So if you come up with ways of rewarding teachers and learners, you've got to have a variety of things. You cannot stick to the same gold star thing, or the putting someone on a podium and everybody's going to clap hands for them. That doesn't work for everyone. Then there's also the fact that we have to be able to, when you're looking at the combinations of what people have that makes them who they are, you've got to be prepared that sometimes people will still act up and behave slightly differently because they're going to some emotional experience at that time. Further opportunities do exist, right? You have to understand that as an individual unit of change, decisions and times of transition is where the most learning takes place. From the work done by Rubel in 1994, you will pick up in any research you do that transition times are significant moments of development because they put individuals in new situations involving uncertainty and requiring new knowledge. So when learners are changing either schools or going to the next grade, that is the time when you've got to do work. That is the time when they are going to face things that are more interesting, and it's an ideal opportunity for you to be able to support them through that process. Even further opportunities exist around the building of support networks beyond the boundaries of the school. And remember, yeah, it's very good to deal with other agencies that have structured programs, and you can then work across the borders of the school, making it interesting, making it relevant for that community. In conclusion, because of all the work I've done with private companies, I thought I should tell you that recruitment policies in most of the successful companies across the globe distinguishes between people in this way. You either have applicants that are making it on merit because they are the best qualified, skilled, and ready to do the work, and everything else is considered non-merit factors. So it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's about who do I take into this foxhole with me? We've got a job to do. So who am I going to pick? You know, the person that I think looks more like me or behaves more like me, or the person who can get the job done. If there's a war going on and there is a whole lot of terrorists outside and I had to climb in a foxhole with someone, I'm taking someone who knows how to use a gun. So at the end of the day, we've got a whole lot of strategies and ideas that we can share with you. Like David said, there's a list outside and you can add your name to it. I found some that's by author Jane Burnett, and I've also got copies of that available and can also email people, so please feel free to connect after the start of this conversation.
Ask any questions of clarity for either Nazir and now for Carmen as well. So before Jean takes the podium, are there any burning questions of clarity, or can we continue? Going once, twice, sold. Okay. Jean Fourie from the University of Johannesburg is our last presenter, and thereafter we will have an argument or a conversation. Jean.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the last speaker, but I'm going to try and take this conversation to a much more practical level. I'm Jean Fourie. I'm from the University of Johannesburg, and I'm an educational psychologist. So I tend to be focused on the individual and focused on people who have problems. That's what I do for a living, and that's where I'm going to try and steer this conversation. But firstly, I want to just remind us about where we are in South Africa. South Africa is a country that has taken on, in the education department, we've taken on the philosophy and the principles and the practice of inclusive education. And this comes from documents and from movements that came from the 1990s, the UNESCO Education for All document, and there was a very big conference that was held in Salamanca in Spain in 1994, and that conference laid the foundation for inclusive education in this country. The Salamanca statement says that schools should accommodate all learners regardless of their physical, intellectual, social, emotional, linguistic, and other some sort of a problem, a disability, something that sets them very much aside from so-called mainstream, so-called normal people, which you've now heard in all these discussions is definitely not the norm. People used to be segregated. People used to be put into special schools, and there were movements prior to this of excluding people on the basis of their disabilities, on the basis of their conditions, and not having them in our mainstream schools, not having them as part of the schooling system. So this international movement questioned that philosophy, questioned that whole idea of segregation and exclusion. And it laid the foundation for an inclusive society and an inclusive education system. South Africa has also signed the United Nations Convention, take into consideration how we deal with everybody in this country. And persons with disabilities in particular are looked at within this convention, and they are not to be excluded from the general education system. There are two very important principles that have come up from the United Nations Convention. The one is the principle of reasonable, feasible, whatever changes we make to our schools, to our classrooms, to our procedures, must be doable, feasible. We must be able to do them. And the other main principle that comes from the UN Convention is that of individualized support. Then, in 2001, South Africa brought out Education White Paper, ability to see or an inability to hear, or some sort of mental illness or a learning problem. Those are internal, intrinsic barriers that we have. But we also understand that the education system itself, the school, the classroom, the society in which we live, can be a barrier, can have obstacles, can have challenges in it that prevent people from accessing the curriculum, from having enough learning support material, from having classrooms that are too big, not enough educators, not enough learning support material. There can be all these other issues as well, and they have all been considered as barriers that need to be overcome in Education White Paper 6. So the White Paper creates the framework to put into practice this very difficult notion of inclusive education and managing diversity in our education system. And there have been, ever since 2001 that I can remember, numerous revisions of policy documents on how we manage diversity. What has happened recently, and that's why I'd like to put it into this talk, is that on the 19th of December, there was a gazette about a policy called the SIAS, which stands for Screening, Identification, Assessment and Support, to manage children who have some sort of diversity, some sort of special need within the classroom and the school. So the SIAS is a policy document that provides the framework. Document, you can get it on you will find this particular document called the SIAS. Okay, so I want to quickly go through each of the stages, each of the sections. Screening implies that there will be early intervention. We all know that the quicker one picks up a problem that a child has and one provides some support, and so at each of the phases, as they transit from one phase into the next phase, schools are encouraged to determine what are the support needs that these children might be needing. The document is also, any support needs that people pick up should also be recorded on the learner profile, and it goes into the tracking system that the department uses, where they keep track of problems that children have. So it's a way to manage support needs from the time that the child enters their schooling to the time that they leave. So it will be continual. And the important thing for teachers to understand is that it happen for all children, particularly in grade R or grade 1 when they enter schooling. However, the rest of the document is not for all children. It will only be for those that have been then identified as having a need where they require additional support. So we all know that there are mainstream schools and that there are special needs schools, and there are now these new full-service schools that have been put in place. Screening should happen at all schools, regardless of whether they are mainstream, special need, or full-service schools. So all schools should have a process in place where they are having a baseline assessment of the learner's potential, of their difficulties, of their assets as well as their deficits. So the next phase is identification and assessment, and this is where once a screening process has happened, the teacher a modified curriculum, they need assessments to be adapted. It will be learners that require some sort of additional support and management within our classrooms. And the process of identification and assessment provides a focus, and it gives us evidence we are now moving into an era of evidence-based teaching, if we know where we started from. So the process of identifying and assessment is to get that baseline so that we know what the learner can do, what are the problems they're having, so that we can eventually assess and see whether our support, remediation, intervention, whatever we've done to help them, whether it has actually helped. Okay, so the last phase in the CS is providing support. Support is one of these huge, a pace of work, all sorts of different things could be construed as support. The important thing to remember about support is that it must be tailor-made. It must be appropriate for the needs of the child. So the teacher who's identified that there's a child in her class who has a problem, who requires some sort of modification to the curriculum or some sort of attention, will collaborate with the SBST, which is the school-based support team, and they will work out a plan, an action plan, a program, something that needs to be done for this child. It can be as simple as referring the child to an optometrist for an eye test, and it can be as complex as putting together a whole plan for the child's lifetime, schooling lifetime, if you know that they're going to need the support, very specialized support for their whole schooling. What also is happening now with the CS document is that it is giving us the platform for schools to be accountable for providing everyone with quality education. And this document will now allow schools and the education system to track exactly what quality is being provided in our schools. So the guiding principle behind the way that inclusive education is envisaged to function on the ground is that we will bring support to the child rather than take the child to the support. Previously, when a teacher started this process and she identified a child in her class as having a problem, she would go through a process, or the school would go through a process of referring the child out of that school to a special school, either on a temporary basis or for the rest of the child's schooling. The process now is that the child remains in the school, the teacher needs to put support in place in her classroom, and she needs to be accountable. She needs to be able to say exactly what she has done, and there needs to be evidence for this, and there are, as usual, I think Carmen mentioned that when we manage things, we need to have admin and we need to have paperwork, and there are forms that we have to show that we have evidence for having provided support to this particular child, and what we've done. We need to have action plans. So instead of the child moving out of your classroom, the support will now be coming to the classroom. And it comes to the classroom in various ways. There's provision made for schools, for instance, if they're full-service schools, to have therapists, to have remedial teachers, occupational therapists, speech therapists in the schools who come in to help the teachers and to support the learners. So the funding as well, because most things are reliant on what happens with the money in the background. The funding will also be provided to these schools if they have gone through the process of identifying these learners and going and assessing them and saying what their support needs are. So the policy now provides us with different levels of support. We are providing different levels of support within the education system. And the levels of support have been rated. Then they would need minimum frequency intervention, maybe once a week, to cope with that particular child. However, it still needs to be recorded and evidence must be kept. If, after screening and identifying and assessing the child, we find that the learner needs medium levels of support, then the services are very actively the different types of assessment that the child needs, There might be specialized learning, teaching, and support material, and there might be specialized assistive devices that the child needs in order to access the curriculum and to learn. This medium level of support will also generally happen within the school. However, there will be additional budget for this. If, after identifying and assessing the child as having high levels of support, then with different kinds of material. And this is generally where the special needs schools fall. So the special needs schools are still there. The special needs schools will be strengthened. But special needs schools also, a lot of them are now becoming resource centres. So they will be providing collaborative support to the teachers in the schools around them so that the teachers who are dealing with low and medium level supports can manage those children in their own classrooms. So this whole idea that a previous speaker spoke about of collaboration, we're now encouraging collaboration between schools. We're also encouraging collaboration with communities and networking with organizations that have therapists and other people that can help you support the children. So this process is quite creative, and it allows for us to have a very holistic view of the emotional levels, and we look at the social interaction of the child. So we're looking very holistically at all the different domains of the learner to determine which domain is the one that requires additional support. We also look at the teaching, the criteria, only focusing on the deficits and only focusing on the child who has a problem. We are also looking to see, is the entire school becoming inclusive? Is the school able to manage these diverse learners? Okay, so I think we now are on to question time. I'm going to let you handle that.
Thank you, Jean. Right, we now are going to start the discussion, and I'm going to invite you to apply your minds and your mouths to the conversation. And if there are any questions of clarity, let's see if there are. If there are, we'll take them. Otherwise, we'll move on to the discussion. Right. Can I ask for some mics for our presenters, please? Right. Can I call for some questions from the audience? We'll take them in order: number 1, number 2, number 3. Number 4, and number 5, and number 6, and number 7, and we'll stop there and we'll come back to the rest. Okay, gentleman in front, you're number 1.
Evening, everyone. My name is Wiskingo Beni. I'm from St. Stephen's College. I'm an intern teacher there. My question is, most of the time you get that in a classroom, you have learners who are different. But the problem is you spend little time with the children, so you are not able to learn their identity. And sometimes, even the schools, for example, some schools are Methodist schools, so that does not allow the learner to show his or her true identity. How do you get to learn their identity in order for you to accept their identity? Because you can't accept something which you do not know. And the other thing is you also have the internet, also you have the technology which they use to showcase their identity instead of them using their environment to showcase their identity. So it's my difficulty.
Okay, well, I think we'll take 2 or 3 questions and then we'll turn it over to you guys, if that's okay.
Hello, my name is Tsepo, and I represent the Anglo-American Chairman's Fund. One question, I actually have, it's a comment, but I think more to Ms. Jean Foree. It's a question because we speak about the white paper, number 6. You know, it's all nice, it's all laid out, we're very proactive, we're very forward-thinking. But when you speak to the teachers and the principals in schools, they are saying that, yes, this is what the policy says, but we don't have, for example, we do not have the the occupational therapists, OTs. They say, we do have slow learners. What do you do? Because I asked them, I'm not a teacher, but I want the teachers to be helped so that we maximize teaching and what have you. And they say, but we don't have support, we don't have enough OTs, we don't have people who can see that this child needs a cochlear implant in time. Do you know what I'm saying? So what do we do? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, number 3.
Okay, my name is Laetitia. I study at WITS. I don't know if it's a question or a statement that I have, but the idea of difference and diversity is very important to me at the moment, because I was in France during the terrorist attacks in January. And since then, I've seen a lot of papers written about how much we must remind the values, the Republican values to children. And everybody must all of a sudden become French and white and Catholic. And that's a big problem for me, because to me that's the reason why we had terrorist attacks. So, and I think it's quite interesting to see the difference between how France and South Africa handle the issue of diversity and difference. And I don't know if France is going the right way. I think they are creating more issues. Is it because of Durkheim's idea of diversity must be handled in a way that we must all be the same, more or less? I don't know. It's a big issue for me at the moment, especially in education, because that's where we start the new regulations.
Okay, let's take those 3 questions while the microphone moves to the back for the other questions. Can I turn it over to you? Nazir, do you want to start?
All right, I think I'll respond to the first and the last question. I think the second question was directed to Jean. The first question, I think you are working with a misconception of the way in which identities get to express themselves and the way in which you put it. How do I get to learn about people's identities? You don't. Okay, let me give you a simple example of the way in which this happens. So you are thinking of, oh, I need to have a time so I can go and learn about all of these people's different identities. I don't think that is what we're saying. You won't, not in classrooms or anywhere else, have the time to do that. Okay, so it's not only the constraints in a classroom, you won't be able to do that anywhere else. Now, here's an example that would show you the way in which difference comes through in a classroom, and you need to ask yourself as a teacher, what will I do with it? A foundation phase grade 3 teacher, I'm not sucking this out of my thumb, this is a research that I've done and published on it, and it's been written as well. She, as normally would be done at that level, set a composition for these grade 3 learners, and they had to write a composition on a day at the park. And she thought that she's going to get these standard kind of responses. Oh, we went to the park and we had a lot of fun and we played games. Or we went to the park and we had a picnic and the whole family were together and we had fun and it was so nice. And that's what she was expecting. Until, and I'm not exaggerating, she read the composition of a homeless child who described a park as a safe place to sleep at night without harassment from the police. She was horrified. One is that the first time that she actually realized that this was a homeless child. Second, she was completely shocked at that age, the kind of level of experience this child was having. So what did she do? She made this child read this composition out to the entire class. And it raised the level of that grade 3 learners' awareness of themselves, of others, of different ways of living, and the differences that existed in the classroom. She didn't tell that child, oh, don't bring that township kind of, thing into my class. She didn't tell the French, if you want to be in France, you become French. She said, let's listen to this experience and see what we can benefit from that. Okay? And all of the learners in that class actually benefited from it. They all found that their relations with each other increased and bettered, and they had a deeper appreciation and respect for others. And that's the way in which I would encourage you to see this. What do you do when you ask for learners to perform particular tasks? Are you expecting them to fill in the missing blank word in the sentence and everybody writes the same thing? Or are you going to encourage debate, critical thinking, and discussion and dialogue amongst them? What are you going to do? Ask them a question like, what does it mean to be a boy? And you'll be shocked. Okay? So those are the ways in which it can play itself out. And I think you're seeing it in a kind of different way. You're expecting, I must go and learn people's differences. It doesn't work in that way anywhere. These things come up in moments. And the question is, how do you understand it? What do you do with it? And how are you going to deal with it? Okay? Letitia, your question is a profoundly important one. Okay, now I don't want to go into too much on this because it is really something that could polarize people, and one needs to handle this carefully and sensitively. I don't agree with the French approach. Clearly, what they're doing, and it's telling. They literally have gone back, and it's fundamentalism of a different sort. So as much as they're claiming that the Islamicists are being fundamentalist and everybody else is, they've been equally fundamentalist, and they're going back to what? To liberty, equality, and fraternity, the beginnings of the Republic. Okay? Now that isn't coming to terms with the kind of postmodern 21st century, difference politics that we're dealing with, and there for me is where the problem actually starts. And I think you've expressed it absolutely aptly. Okay? Is that indeed the attempt is you either become like us or we don't accept you. Now that is by far, the worst understanding of tolerance or working with difference. It's really an assimilationist approach. And they're actually going backwards rather than forwards. So clearly what we are saying here is that I'm stating that I don't agree with the French approach. I find it fundamentalist and archaic in the extreme. And I don't find it helpful at all. Having said that, the values that they are portraying are important ones. I don't think any of us, in our rational minds would disagree with equality, with fraternity, or with liberty. We would all wonder those are democratic values. But the way in which it cannot be only on my terms. It would need to be seen in the complexity of the meanings that it has for different people, and we need to have honest dialogues about it. You can't just impose it, and we're not there, and it's a terribly polarized and violent situation at the moment that's not making dialogue easy. But we need to overcome that to be able to get into spaces where we can talk about it and debate and get richer understandings of these concepts for ourselves. I hope that helps.
Okay, so with regards to the question of Education White Paper 6, which has been around since 2001, so it's quite a long time, yes, we are having major difficulties with the implementation of these legislations and policies and frameworks on the ground. And that is always one of the big problems that we have, is how do we put these things in place in the classroom? How do we put these things in place in the school? It's all very well to have wonderful ideals, which we do have, but putting it into practice, having enough therapists in the class to support the learners, having enough resources, simple things like having a teacher aide, having someone in the classroom who helps the teacher, looking at teacher-pupil ratios in schools. These are all issues that are impeding the implementation of our goals of inclusive education and managing all diversity within the classroom. But I do have a glimmer of hope with the new CS, because it does provide for provisioning of new support roles, and there is talk about having learner support educators who are going to be supporting educators in schools, so that there will be far more supportive people for the teacher. We do not expect teachers to manage diverse classrooms all on their own. It is a complex task required. It requires a lot of time and effort, and the curriculum itself is challenging enough, let alone still having to differentiate the curriculum and differentiate the way that we assess our learners. So to do all those things does require additional support, and we are pleased to see that the department is acknowledging that this requirement needs to happen for getting this to happen on the ground. So I hope that helps.
Okay, can we take the next one? Number 4, I think, was up there somewhere.
Okay. My name is Rebecca Sima, and I can say I'm a township school survivor. And I have a concern about the White Paper 6 and the CIAS policy. Perhaps I'll be reiterating what's already been said, but coming from a kind of school like that, it kind of concerns me with privilege in South Africa, or a case of privilege in the country, and how most policies tend to benefit a certain class of people instead of the other class of people. And the kind of work that needs to be done and the research that needs to be done, I feel as if a policy that it's flawless, it's very beautiful policy, and the fact that there's a conference that has invited teachers it's an exceptional thing. So the steps are there. However, the materialization of it might take a few decades to materialize in the lower communities. So I would feel as if there would need to be more research done on that to tailor make the policy for schools that are still struggling to have ceilings and better sanitary facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the next person was in the same area. Yeah, there we are.
Hi, my name is Josh Elder. I represent Pioneer Academies. And one of the questions that I have, going back to the very beginning, the statement about trying to get our learners to understand they don't need to be who other learners are, but they need to accept them. And that equipping learners to acknowledge the differences. And so from our standpoint, being a new school, which is a great luxury that there's no prior history to really have to fight discrimination and other issues around diversity. But the flip side to that, they're coming from very diverse backgrounds. And for some of our learners, it's the first time that they're actually experiencing learners that are very different from them. So I was wondering, just to get some practical steps of how to begin this journey to really have our students embody that statement of they don't need to be who their friends are, who the other students are, but they need to accept them. And how can we go about just starting that journey and beginning that at our school?
My question, hello, sorry, I'm Shannon Bishop. I'm also from Pioneer Academies. My question links with the previous speaker's question as well as Tsepo in the front there. As teachers, we are educators. What happens if we misdiagnose or if we incorrectly create a scenario around our students when it comes to issues of learning and disabilities? I think that's a big thing to consider.
Okay, I think there was one more. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Afternoon, colleagues. Sorry, last time I spoke about something similar, and I'm just going to carry on speaking about the same thing. So sorry if I bore you. So I want to be really unpopular and talk about similarity in a talk about difference. So by definition, schools that are special schools require daily complex adaptations to the curriculum. By this definition, many, in fact, most township schools would be in fact be special schools. These schools, I agree with you, are almost all of them poverty traps, in the words of some economic education economists, and in fact, definitely barriers to learning. The experiences faced by these children, while they are, of course, completely different, each one of them are very similar. and they are under-resourced schools. They have extremely large classes. The teachers are not adequately supported. The curriculum leaves more than half of these kids behind and never ever catches them up. More than half of the children do not pass school. And then finally, they all, and this is a really important one, have a very important similarity. They all learn in their second language, which is English, and they're not adequately supported for that. So I'll go back to what I keep on saying. If you have money and power, please can you put your thoughts into the following things. Hiring more primary school teachers, paying them better, and training them a lot better to teach mostly black kids in townships. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very thought-provoking questions. Let me refer to the panel. Carmen, do you want to start this time?
I'm thinking I'll respond to, I think I got Josh, is that your name? Well, because it's a new school, I think it's the sooner you start, the better. So you're in the right place. David's in the room, so I'm going to go right out and offer you our support. We'll be able to send a team of people there that can help you. So we'll have to do a needs assessment on the school, starting with the staff. You know, see where you are, what the gaps are, and actually profile the school in some way. So we'll have to do some data collection with you and then come up with a solution, which we are able to do. We'll use some resources from the Career Center here at Saibono, and that same offer is open to everybody in this room. It's a general offer, and it's always been open since the Career Center has been there. I might respond also, and this might help Jean out a little with some of the issues around the white paper. Yes, obviously teachers have to be careful around making that assessment. I would stay within the boundaries of my profession if I were you. That would be my professional advice to you. And rather always find someone to refer a case to. And we will also be able to assist with that. I'm sure Jean could also, because there are networks of these people. Even within the Department of Education, they do have in every district education psychologists and other professionals. You might struggle to get hold of them, and perhaps we can assist and help you there. So you have my contact details. Please feel free when you are stuck just to reach out and say, you know, I'm looking for someone, this is the case, and we will see where we can help. That's all we can do, is be there for each other. I don't know, I think Jean probably wants to add to that. Josh, are you covered? Thanks.
Okay. I'd like to respond to the lady who was talking about the policy documents that imply that there is schools, special schools that have privileged schools, that this policy will belong to, and that there will be benefits for some special schools, or specific schools. Let me be quite clear that the policies are universal across all our schools. It's not just for certain schools, and for other schools that have some different kind of policy. The process is standardized. The process is for us to have a way of looking at how we manage diversity across all the schools. And in the past, yes, there was this idea that certain places had more therapists and more funding and had more support than other, let's say, township schools that are not as well resourced. However, the aim of this whole exercise now is to try and be more equitable in the way that the money is spent. So as long as the school and the school-based support team have gone through the process of saying that they need support for these learners because they have major, let's say, second language problems, and they need to have help with teaching language issues, and they can provide evidence, and they can go through the onerous paperwork of putting the admin and the forms into the district, we are assured that that kind of support will come back into the schools. So one of the things that the policy says is that it is designed to make sure that the limited money that we do have in education is spent where it should be spent. so that it goes into the schools and into the extra therapists that might be needed in the school, the extra learning and teaching support material that the school might need, so that the school has the funding to do those sorts of things. So the policy is definitely not designed for the privileged and the few. The other issue that I wasn't very clear about is the idea of the identification and diagnosis. Please, as Carmen has said, it is not the teacher's role to diagnose any problem that a child has. Our responsibility as educators is, however, to be very observant, to see what children are doing in front of us, and to see if there are children who are struggling, and to screen. The screening process is definitely the teacher's role. After screening and the teacher has said she thinks there are children here who have some sort of problem, who are going to need additional help, then that case needs to be referred to somebody who can do a proper diagnosis. And the collaboration is not only with psychologists and educational psychologists, the collaboration is also with the health professions, with optometrists, with people who can do audiology screenings, and there's a lot with regards to the health services department, for instance, social workers, feeding schemes, malnutrition, all those aspects would also be covered. So if you are able, please go and read the policy in its entirety.
I'm going to start with that question. I heard you saying something quite different. And I think you're absolutely correct. Our country from 1994 right till the present is superb at generating policies. So we're really good, but in implementation we are really, really bad. So I think your point is right. Jonathan Jansen, who is the rector at Free State University, describes that in symbolic political symbolism. And this is another instance of it. So I think you're absolutely right. For schools that are without electricity, without any sewage system, without any basic sanitation, screening is a privilege. When you're screening people that are basically in need of remedial kind of assistance, it is a privilege. We have already got tons of data that indicates that teachers actually feel completely unable to be able to give support to people in their classroom because of not having the skills themselves. So I have serious doubts, and you can very technically try to separate screening from diagnosis, and oh no, the diagnosis will be done by the psychologists and the clinicians and all of it. I very seriously doubt whether teachers are going to be able to do the screening themselves. This is what I have in terms of data at the moment. ADD is in fashion at the moment, people, particularly in middle class schools. So if anything happens in your classroom, oh yeah, we're dealing with another ADD. Now that is in vogue, okay? Anything that happens, people get positioned in that way, and the dangers around that are there. So I'm in total agreement with what you're saying, but I do want to say something that I think is in support of what Jean is saying. The moment is now, my dear, to be able to make the government aware of the kind of support that we need in order to allow this policy to be implemented. And the fact that they're going to be having a conference on this actually is in our favor, so that we can highlight all of these things. How are teachers going to be trained to do the screening? How are you going to ensure that basic facilities are going to be met before we go to other things? And so on. So I think I would be in agreement from what I heard you saying. The second point that I wanted to make is with regards to the Pioneer Academy people. And I want to take you back to the 1980s, when email just came out, people, and we didn't have smartphones and the internet and all of it. And this is something that the National Geographic Society did. So if you, and I'm sharing it with you because you're asking, where do we start with the journey? What did National Geographic Society do? They linked people throughout, children, okay, and they range between the ages 5 to 7. They linked up children throughout the world using email, and they simply asked them to say, what are you doing today? And when the person from a completely war-stricken area in central Rwanda responded to that, to a person that was sitting in the cushy comforts of New York, read this, their worlds completely opened up in terms of understanding how different lives are being lived in different kind of contexts. And it's a simple task like that. Okay? Tell me what you do in your day today. Okay? Another simple exercise. Let's go around the room and tell me how you greet your parents at home. Okay, so there are simple things that really is just simply trying to capture the idea. And if you hold on to that, I think a whole range of things open up to you. It's the simple idea is how we do things differently. Let us hear about the ways in which you do the same thing differently. And that leads me to the last point, sir, and I really liked what you said. Okay, indeed, and that's the irony, and that is definitely from my experience in working in this area. The more we talk about difference, the more we hit similarities. That actually, you know what? We may be having, cereal for breakfast, and you may be having fruit for breakfast, but we're all having breakfast, isn't it? None of us don't wake up and not have anything. Now let's start talking about those people that go to bed and wake up every morning without any food. And it opens up these spaces, and you're absolutely right. Okay, whilst we may talk of differences, the irony, okay, is that we actually hit more points of similarity and commonality that allow us to link up with each other rather than separate with each other. And therein, and I think it's now become a maxim that's taken for granted. Okay, that's why we think diversity is strength. Okay, difference is strength. It doesn't weaken things, it builds things up, because it actually shows us the various ways in which a single thing can actually be done.
Okay, I see a hand up there. So number 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and 4. Set your hand up. Okay, we have 4 questions. Let's start with you up there.
Thank you, David. Mine is a comment more than a question. Dumi Diale from the University of Johannesburg. I just wanted to comment part of it, Jean and Carmen have touched on it in terms of the actual role of teachers in terms of identifying, screening, and I do agree with you that if teachers are not well trained, even the screening itself, it's a challenge. Because basically, if we go back to teachers now and say now we need to talk about SIAS, when they actually still are not sure what CAPS means. That's where we are at this stage. SIAS is more of a luxury to them. But also I just want to put a challenge to us to say, let us go back to our resiliency that we have. What have we been doing that was working? Something was working. The fact that despite all the challenges that have been there in the townships, we have people in key positions, we have professionals who've come out of those systems. What is it that has been working? It was not everything that was bad. So for us to throw the baby with the bathwater doesn't help. Let us look at what is it that has been working that we can enhance better versus wanting to change everything else. That's one. But 2, let us also look at full service schools within the community, within the township schools. Currently, there are full service schools that are operating within townships. And I have realized, working in Soweto, at the Soweto campus of UJ, that we have a service school in Rockville that actually schools around Rockville themselves don't know about that service school. And yet we have occupational therapists sitting there, we have all the social workers sitting there, we have all the specialists sitting there. So I think one of the key things that we need to go back in is how do we begin to map our communities? So community mapping should play a key role in understanding what are the resources that we have within communities that we can start using. Thank you.
I hope this you can hear me from now. Yeah. My name is Emmanuel CBC. I work at St. Stadium, and I'm also an intern there doing a B.Ed at UNISA currently. What I'm looking at is something maybe you just highlighted now in terms of, I think maybe we should also look at how do we support teachers in terms of, like, I heard when you were talking, Jean, you were talking about maybe we don't have to take this child out to a special school, but maybe there must be a social worker in the school, so that may, for example, as Whiskey was saying earlier, that maybe he's struggling to identify the problems. That is not his job to screen and do that. But if maybe we can work in terms of finding how can we make these schools where there's totally no one to do that. I am a teacher there, and maybe I'm teaching, and I can kind of see who's struggling where and where. Where do I refer? Right here. You know, those ideas, they start to rise from there, that now you start to think that this child should maybe go to a different school. Because when I'm in the class, I only have 45 minutes or an hour to teach. I can't have time to say no. Maybe, for example, with the school we were talking about, maybe you say there is a social worker or all those kind of things. They can go out there, maybe during exams, they have this extra time. So what about in a classroom where I'm doing a class test? How do I accommodate a learner who is slow maybe in reading text or slow in writing? Do I have to design 2 class tests where I'll design one which will be slow for those who can take it slow, or do I have to design one for those who will be fast? And then in terms of supporting teachers, some of us, we go to teaching because we love, maybe for example, I love math and I love teaching. Maybe my mind, or earlier when I was taught in teaching, I didn't learn much in terms of diversity, inclusion, and all those kind of things. Right now I can see that, but I don't have enough training. I don't have, like you were saying, like the lady was saying back there, can we have those kind of things where those teachers who maybe don't understand how to include maybe learners in class, how can they further be trained? How can they be supported? So my concern is based on we teachers. Currently we're talking about supporting learners. How are we being supported? So for simple example, if there is a psychology, even one in a school, then maybe we can try and say there is support. I can refer to that. And then how can we deal with such things? Thank you.
Probably what's going to be our last question.
Thank you, David, and I'm aware that you're left with only 10 minutes. Am I right? One quick question to the prof there. What programs can we put in place to assist educators not to look at learners in the classroom as diverse, but learners having potential? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to just respond to the question from my colleague to me with regards to screening and mapping of the resources in our communities. I just want to make it very clear that the Department of Education is embarking on a process of educating schools in how to do the CS management within the schools. So please ensure that that sort of training is, that the teachers do attend those training sessions. And screening, for me, every single teacher, I've been teaching at the university now for 10 years, and every single class that I teach, there are teachers who will come to me and say, you know, I have this child in my class who can't read, can't see, has family problems, has this, has that. Those are all times when teachers are screening. Teachers are really good at looking at the children in their classes and seeing who's battling and who's not coping. They know this. You know it from the marks, you know it from the schoolwork you get, you know it from the way the child behaves. Teachers are really good at that. You're with the child, even if it's only for an hour a day for that class, you're with the child for a long time. Children spend more time at school than they spend at home. I've had cases where teachers have picked up that a child needs glasses and the parents haven't. So for me, I don't think that we need to focus that much on the screening problem. I think teachers are doing that automatically all the time while they're in class with their learners. And if you sit in any staff room, you'll hear teachers complaining about this child can't do that and that child can't do this. So I think we're pretty good at figuring out who the kids are who need help. And then the other question was with regards teachers' roles. I think the teachers need to sometimes be a little bit more proactive in the role that they take. And it's just a role of following up. If you've referred a child to have their eyes tested, follow up. Why is the child not wearing glasses? Why can they still not see the blackboard? So it's that kind of attention to detail that we're talking about with the teachers' roles. And yes, teachers do need support. And a lot of schools recognize this. That's why they have in-service training for teachers. And that's why the school-based support teams have been set up, because these are teams within the school that are more experienced teachers, teachers who have some sort of training, and teachers who can support other teachers. And also the cluster meetings that people go to. These are all places, and there's lots and lots of support for educators. You should never feel that you're alone and that you're just doing this on your own.
I know you directed your question to Prof, but I just want to add in a little suggestion there before our time runs out. One of the very good ways I've picked up, and it almost ties into what Professor was saying earlier, is that you need to be creative. So you need to think along the lines of opening up a conversation where there isn't a closed way out that makes things simple for the teacher. An example would be that if you taught learners a skill or something new that they've just picked up, a good question to also ask them to answer is, where would you apply this in your life? And that brings out that difference again, and then the similarities. So you need to think along that line, so that actually instead of closing the lesson off, like we are so good at consolidating because we want to finish it and assess it, you don't move off from that conversation. Even after 2 weeks, you can come back and say, remember last week we learned this? So where did you go and apply that in your life? A story that comes to mind is when children know that you use tires to put on top of your shack so that the lightning doesn't hit you. Now, another child doesn't know that because they're not living there. They've got a tiled roof somewhere in a suburb. Are you with me? But the fact is that there is a child that knows that, so they're applying something they've learned in science in a practical way. Thank you.
You carry on. Just hang on to that. We'll carry on with the conversation. But we're going to lose our live feed, and so I'd like to thank those people who may have joined us online and invite them to join us again on the 18th of March, just in case we lose the live feed before we make this announcement. So thank you very much. Carry on, Carmen.
Yeah, I think I was done there, and I don't know if anybody else.
you.
We're hoping that we'll be able to get the means to be able to realize this.
Thank you. Thanks, Nazir. Just to follow the point that Nazir makes before I wrap up, I think we've recognized the deficiencies of teacher training, and we've now drawn up some wonderful plans for alternatives. And let me leave it at that. Okay. I'd like to thank the speakers. It's been a very wide-ranging discussion. I think we've seen different perspectives of difference and diversity. We've seen lateral and horizontal and even diagonal perspectives, and I thank you for that broad range. I think one of the things that does stand out, because the future is indefinite, we're always at the beginning of a journey. We never really get further than that. And I think we don't have the answers to many of these questions, but I think at least we have the questions. What's important, I think, is the discussion and the sharing and being open and honest when things are not going right. But there are intelligent people applying their minds to it, and in the same way that we got to where we are from a place that was a lot more difficult, I suspect that in 20 years from now, things will be a lot better, but then we'll be dealing with other problems. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to come this afternoon, and to thank our speakers again for very thought-provoking comments. So thought-provoking that I'm sure most people are going away with unfinished questions, unfinished thoughts, and maybe that's part of the benefit of a discussion like this. So I'd invite you to come back and have more conversations. On the 18th of March, the next one will be at Wits University at the School of Education in Parktown. We're not quite sure what the topic will be, but it'll be just as interesting and just as provocative, I hope. So again, thank you very much. Continue the conversation outside. I'm sure there's still some leftovers that are waiting to be polished off. And please, and I think the three speakers may be around for a few minutes more. So please, let's not end the conversation. Thank you very much.